From Billionaire Israel, welcome to a very special webinar on investing in Israel. Hello everyone, my name is Jeremy Schwaber. I'm head of new accounts here at Wise Money Israel. With me is Evan Lieberman, CEO and founder of Wise Money Israel. And for the next hour, we're going to be discussing how investing in Israel can benefit you. Now, before we get started, we do have a disclaimer I want to mention. This webinar is intended solely for general information and educational purposes. This is not advice. If you would actually like advice, please schedule an appointment with us. Now, without further ado, my colleague here, CEO and founder of Wise Money Israel, Evan Lieberman, was born and raised in America. He's been in Israel for over 20 years. He knows the market very well. He is a licensed portfolio manager with the Israel Security Authority, and he lives here in Ben with his wife Sarah and 3 kids. So Evan, tell us why it is that wise investors look to the Israeli market to invest.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you all for investing your time. It's precious time that you have. We have people from all around the world with us today, and we're going to help you. When you invested in us, we're going to help you to understand how and why we would invest in Israel. Started the business over 11 years ago to bring in people like yourselves, people that are around the world but have an affinity to Israel and want to join with us in our success as a country. And so we're going to teach you about some of the reasons why you would want to invest, and then the practical. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring up the slideshow, and you're going to be seeing everything about the why, and we're going to get into some questions and answers, and then we're going to go for the how. So Wise Money Israel is set up to help people around the world seamlessly and successfully invest in Israel. But before we talk about investing specifically in Israel, I'm going to talk to you about one of the wise investment practices known around the world, which is diversification. Now, investing in Israel is going to give you a lot of diversification in multiple ways, and I want to tell you about some of those valuable reasons why you want to diversify your portfolio. And the first of which is the world is a global economy now. There's much interconnectivity, and so what you want to do is be able to have some of your finances in at least 2 places to have diversification. Many people think investing in their own country, in their own currency is the way to go. And in our global society now, you have to have diversification. We don't want to have all of our eggs in one basket, as the adage goes. And so by investing in Israel, you're able to have exposure to companies that you would never have investing on Wall Street, for example, or investing in Singapore or in the London Exchange. You're going to get exposure to over 500 companies on the equity side, over 600 different bond series, and companies that are innovative in Israel that you're just never going to find anywhere else. You also need to be diversified where your funds are actually located. Most people's funds are located in their country, and that's okay, except when economies run into problems. We've seen over the last number of decades, the first thing that they do sometimes is they shut down capital movement, meaning you can't move your funds to another country outside of your borders. So investing in Israel is one way of getting some of your funds outside of your own borders. Obviously, diversifying internationally and geographically is important. You get exposed to different continents, different places. Around the world, things happen, as we've seen in the decades past, that sometimes things will happen in the East, and that will affect the economies of the East more. And sometimes things will happen in the West, and we are your democracy in the Middle East, and you get exposure geographically to our market there as well. And you'll be able to, of course, get diversification through the currency, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, billionaire investors know the value, as do multinationals, of investing and putting some of their funds here in Israel. There are companies here and mines here that are just not like any you've seen elsewhere. We have the most Nobel Prize winners coming out of the Jewish people than any people on the planet. Even though we're a small country, we're able to generate a lot of innovation over the last 70 years of our modern existence. So the billionaire investor, Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway, probably the best known and most well-respected investor of our generation, says this about Israel. Israel is the best place to invest because of its people. There is no other place with such high-quality people with motivations and abilities. Israel has a very positive future. Now, I couldn't have paid him to give a better commercial for Israel, and I don't think he's a Zionist per se, and yet the first investment his company, which is a very successful company, Berkshire Hathaway, made outside of the United States, outside of his own market, was in fact Israel. And he bought an Israeli company, bought about half of its shares, And then he came back a few years later and paid double for those other 50% of the shares. So he's a big investor and big fan of Israel, as are many of the multinational companies such as Hewlett Packard, IBM, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. They all recognize the value of having their investments here, their R&D centers here. They're buying up Israeli companies left and right. And ultimately, some of the innovations that you're seeing today, not only in technology, but in other fields, is actually coming out of Israel, and we just don't know it. But on an everyday basis, if you're using the internet, then your traffic is being secured via firewalls developed 20 years ago by Check Point, and now they're doing cybersecurity for you. And so behind the scenes, you're getting a lot of diversification into Israel just by the products you're using. The Amazon Kindle you may use, and that's research coming directly out of Israel. WhatsApp or Skype, however you're communicating with others in your city, your country, and over the world, is done through a technology which was invented and commercialized here originally in Israel. The flash drive, disk on a chip, that was invented here in Israel as well. And the Intel computer, invented by Intel, has been powering PCs around the world now for decades, and its biggest research center and the development of all the PC chips that it does is in fact done here in Israel. Driving technology, autonomous driving technology coming out is being developed and has been developed by Mobileye. Waze, this is traffic redirection through Google Maps or the Waze application itself, is all done here in Israel. And this is just a few of the products that impact you on a daily basis coming out of this small yet impactful land. But not only are we impacting the everyday things that you see, but some of the things behind the scenes that are making an impact on the world, as we are supposed to be a light to the nation, these are things that are impacting the world on a global scale. And so the areas of water conservation, desalination, these are happening and have been invented. Drip irrigation was invented in Israel. In the bottom right of your screen, you'll see a machine that has been developed and distributed, for example, in Africa. And it literally pulls water out of thin air for people that don't have access to clean drinking water. The defense industry and national security technologies, things that go into missile technology and guarding our airlines from being shot down, that's developed, of course, by necessity by Israel, has its own security threats. And so it's the innovation that is developed in our army is helping the world be more secure. We have medical innovations and many, many patents, far outweighing their size. Technologies such as Rewalk. On the bottom left of your screen, you will see an invention that came out a few years ago from an Israeli company that's an exoskeleton powered, and it actually works with you to move your limbs. For those that are paraplegics, it's literally allowing the lame to walk. And artificial intelligence, we're a leader in that as well as some of the green energy technologies of the world. And so these are some of the things that Israel is impacting on a daily basis and just affecting the world for good. But that's not why you're going to invest in Israel alone. You're going to look for a strong economy. When you're looking for a second or a third environment to invest in, a third economy to invest in, you want to look for those monikers which are strong, those things that are unique about this economy. And while we are a small economy, we are rated AA-, which is amazing for a small company of our size, having only been around in modern existence for 70 years. We are now competing with large Western nations. The United States used to have a AAA rating, for example, and has dropped in the global recession down to AA+. So we're only a few notches away on Standard & Poor's credit worthiness for a country. We're ranked number 1 for inflation stability. Our inflation is typically under 1% and has been stable for many decades now. We are considered a lender nation. The United States borrows more than it takes in, but we are actually lending out to the nations. And this is, of course, a fulfillment for those that follow the Bible, that this is what our people was meant to be. Our central bankers are rated among the best in the world, rated A for the last 2 decades. We're a growing population, which helps us grow our gross domestic product, which we'll get to in the next slide. And of course, or maybe not so of course, our low unemployment helps us to keep the economy fully functioning at all times. Now, if you were an economist, you would be looking at an economy from the lens of the gross domestic product. How much is the country able to bring in an income? And so we would look at this chart of the last approximately 20 years, and we would see Israel in the far left blue column far outpacing the growth rate of GDP against other OECD or modern developed nations that include the United States, Canada, England, France, etc., Japan. So we've been around 4.5% GDP for almost the last 2 decades, which is just a phenomenal growth for a nation which is considered a developed nation. If we compare to the other countries, in specifically the United States, around 2 to 3% growth maximum. What's really interesting in this particular graph, though, is what happened during stressful times. Israel is known to be actually a very resilient nation as far as our economy. We're able to adapt to things that happen as far as crises in the world. So what happened in the 2008-2009 global meltdown, the global recession? Well, in fact, we see here that Israel did not even go into recession during the global recession. Doesn't mean we didn't feel the effects of people panicking, but we did see that the economy continued to grow, even at a smaller pace, but in positive territory, whereas most of the economies of the world, as you see below the line, were in minus territory. They were shrinking as our economy was growing. Another thing that economists look at is the debt to GDP ratio. This is, as you're earning income, is the debt that the government is incurring keeping up with it, or at least being a little bit less? As you're growing your debt, are you growing your income as well? And obviously we know as people that have families and our own budgets, we don't want to grow our debt beyond what we can actually handle from our income. So what is Israel doing as far as debt to GDP ratio? Well, economists actually are very much admirable of what Israel has been able to do over the last decade in dropping our debt to GDP ratio. It already started at a very admirable 69% of debt to GDP, but we have been dropping it because we have a very strong central banking system, which in fact doesn't allow the legislature to run the economy as many other legislatures do. And so there's a strong hand of the professional economists to run the economy. And so we're able to drop that now to we're about 60% debt to GDP, whereas we see, for example, other nations like the United States in the black dotted line actually growing their debt over time as a percentage of their GDP, which can lead to dire and unwanted consequences in the future. And we're just waiting for that other shoe to drop.
Thank you, Evan. I just wrote an article recently about currency and how the shekel is stronger than most other currencies. And we see here, if we look at our high point in 2002, that the shekel has gained 52% against the dollar over that period. That means if you had $100,000 and change it to shekels, it would be worth $152,000 today. That's even before you've invested any of it. So we see that with the shekel growth against the dollar in particular, that this would give you a multiplier effect on your money. In fact, we see that within America, the printing of money is not going to go away anytime soon, that this probably will continue as we go. And we see it similarly with the pound as well. The pound has lost 90% against the shekel since 2007. We're not sure what will happen with Brexit, but we know that our currency has been historically strong over that period. Similarly, over the same period, the stock performance in Israel has been higher than almost every other market. We see that it beat America, we see that it beat Europe and UK as well. So in addition to this strong currency, we have strong investments as well.
So what have those strong investments done in Israel locally since, let's say, the last crisis? Since 2009 to date, we see that the Tel Aviv stock market, if we measure that as the Tel Aviv 125 index, has in fact returned 9% compounded annual growth rate. So every year, year over year, on average, over time, you could expect and could have expected 9% growth. Now, any given year, of course, is going to be different. You're going to have great years, you're going to have challenging years, but over time, the Tel Aviv market has been doing very well. But if you were willing to take more risk, you would have put some of your money in the smaller medium enterprise stocks, for example, that we choose for clients as we manage their funds, and those actually outperform by far with 14% return. But you might say, Evan, what I want to do is have less in stock, more in bond. I'm more of a fixed income guy or gal. I like capital preservation. So what can you do for me in Israel? Well, we have about 20 different corporate bonds in Israel that we invest in and recommend and put those into our managed portfolios. And over the last approximately 12 years, they have returned 6% year over year. And this is really a quite amazing number given the fact that in many of those years, interest rates around the world have been near zero. So the corporate bond market here is doing really well. It's not indicative necessarily of what the rates are today, but if you look over the long period, that's a sort of return that Israel has been able to accomplish. So I want to go ahead now and close up the section about why investing in Israel. So I'm going to review a little bit for you. So there are innovations in Israel that just aren't here other places except for here. And so the impacts we're making on the world, if you want to get involved in some of those technologies, if you want to get involved in some of those companies, you're going to find innovation, you're going to find it here. You're also not alone. You find that the billionaire investors, the multinationals, those that understand economies, and the economists themselves look at our economy and say, now there's a strong economy, there's a place where we want to put our money. As we talked about, this country is rated AA minus. It's highly growing. Its GDP is not only high relatively, but it is growing. And we see a low debt to GDP ratio. Israel investing is a place where you can get diversification in multiple ways, not just for the shekel, but in other ways. And we see a very strong stock performance and bond performance here in our local market. There are others of you that may have other motivations to invest in Israel. For example, you may feel a spiritual conviction from a biblical perspective to be part of what's going on here in the Israeli economy. We want to see that you're standing, you want to see that you're standing with Israel. You're adding to our economy, you're adding to our people. You may have heard of the BDS movement of the last few years, the boycott and divestment and sanctions movement. This is something that you can combat directly yourself by investing into Israel instead of divesting. You may want to support Israel's companies. You want to support our people. This is a great way to support the Jewish people practically, because when you invest in companies, you're investing not only in your success to profit from the companies, but the companies that you are growing are actually helping our economy, helping the people that not only work for the companies, but in a trickle-down effect, actually helps every Israeli that lives here. There's a demand for technology. The demand for technology in the last 20 years has just risen more and more and more. And Israel is known to be the startup nation. This is where technologies, many of them begin and are commercialized here. And so you want to be involved in some of these companies that are putting out this innovation. And last but not least, it's one of the only markets in the world where bonds, both corporate and government, can actually get inflation protection.
Thank you, Evan. Bond inflation protection is very important, of course. By the way, I just want to remind everyone that we'll be answering questions later, so please keep your questions coming. This time, Evan, please tell us how Wise Money Israel has successfully helped hundreds of our clients invest 150 million shekels in Israel.
We are a local licensed portfolio management company licensed by the Israel Securities Authority. And so what you have is a local entity who is making decisions for you as they see things happening, both reading the Hebrew press, seeing the Hebrew reports coming out on a quarterly basis, talking with the company, seeing what's happening in our economy, and making decisions for your benefit on an ongoing day-to-day basis. We're significantly outperforming Israeli stock market benchmarks, both last year in 2019 and 2020, both a great year for investing and a challenging year. We were able to perform and come up with positive returns even in this tough 2020 year. We do perform our own in-house fundamental research and use external professional sources to understand what are the stocks and what are the bonds that are going to outperform general indexes. And that's the value we bring to you. Besides getting you invested in Israel, invested in our people, invested in a strong currency such as the shekel, we're also helping you to outperform just a normal average market performance. We do use individual securities, therefore, and we put those into your portfolio. And over time, we find opportunities to buy and sell. Now, in general, you may ask, what is our investment philosophy? Because that's important when you are looking for a money manager. And we actually are, in general, having a philosophy of buy and hold. We don't like to churn accounts. We don't do day trading. We don't like to go in and out of stocks. We do our research. We determine where we want to be, and then we time the exit and entry points so that we can maximize our clients' profits. And of course, we're on every day. We're monitoring portfolios. We're monitoring your portfolio to make sure that we're looking for the risks and we're looking for the ways to get that extra return that you deserve. We also have to be very well suited to meet your needs. As I said, we're not only a Hebrew-speaking organization, but all of our personnel speak English. That'll come to bear whether you're signing agreements with us or with the brokerages we use. And we make sure all the platforms that we're using support English for all of our clients around the world. We have worked globally with hundreds of customers from 30 different countries. We deliver investments that share your values. We are trustworthy, and we help build with you a diversified investment portfolio that meets your specific needs. We're very client focused in that regard. It's one of the things that we pride ourselves on. Many of our clients come to us in recommendations from other clients that have successfully invested with us for years. We're very proud of that. 99% of our managed clients stay with us for many, many years. And in our recent survey of clients, we found that they've rated us excellent for reliability and professionalism.
Thank you, Evan. This time we're going to take some questions. First question comes from, don't have a name, sorry. What happens in war and time of crisis like Corona to my money, safety, and performance? Can you address that, Evan?
I can address that. So the crisis times are interesting. We can divide the crisis times, let's say in the last 20 years, into two different types. The first is war. We have war and have had war for the 70 years of our existence. The good news is we win the wars, and that has been true throughout our history. But it obviously can throw a little bit of unknown into the stock market specifically. The bond market typically doesn't go down very much at all when we are starting to see wars and rumors of wars, so to speak. But we've seen that ultimately the last four wars or incursions into Gaza haven't thrown the market more than 4 to 6%. Before the war and during the war. And then as the war is in the middle, usually our wars are very short. We're talking a month, sometimes two. In the middle, when it becomes clear again that this is not going to affect our economy, then the economy begins to grow again. The stock market's measures start to come back up. And at the end of the war, we're at a higher place than we were before it started. So that's wars don't really affect us. I know it seems like it should, but there's a lot more made of it abroad on what the potential outcome could be, and the economy is not affected by those very much at all. Crises, though, that are global in nature do affect our stock market specifically, less the bond market, of course. And we do see that we track somewhat, as most stock markets do around the world, with what happens on Wall Street. There's an investing adage that says when the United States sneezes, the world catches a cold. And so we're not inoculated, so to speak, to use a phrase used nowadays, from the effects of panic in the world markets. When there's panic, people are selling, and they're very indiscriminate on what they sell. And they're selling their Israeli holdings like they're selling all their other holdings. We take that as a time to actually invest and buy because, as Warren Buffett said, when there's blood in the streets, that's when you pick up your best bargains. And we've done that successfully during Corona. The crises are usually limited to back in the Great recession of 2008, 2009, when we didn't go through recession. Our stock market still took 2 years to recover, but then it recovered and continued to grow very significantly, about 161% from the trough. In Corona year of 2020, we only saw it took about 10 to 12 months to recover.
Thank you, Evan. We have a lot of great questions coming, but a number of them will be answered very shortly as we continue here. One question that won't, which is a very good question, do you work on the Shabbat? Well, actually, no, we don't work on the Shabbat. We are available 6 days a week for service, but the Shabbat we do not work. So at this time, we're going to move ahead so that we can answer a number of these other questions to the process. And let me talk about the process for investing in Israel, because some of you are saying, well, this sounds good, but what do I need to do? Is it difficult? How do I get started with this? So the first thing to know is that we at Wise Money Israel help assist our clients to open an investment account. Now, you're going to need an investment account to trade stocks, bonds, and ETFs on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. And we partner with leading brokerages, which have over 340 billion in assets and over 1.2 million customers. Your cash would be held in shekels at Israeli banks here, and your securities would be held at the TASE, which is the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. You would wire directly to the brokerage your funds. Nothing ever comes to us. And we have a limited power of attorney so that we can manage your wealth on your behalf. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange is regulated by the Israeli Securities Authority and the Knesset and has a total market capitalization of $569 billion. Every day, over 3,300 stocks, bonds, and funds are electronically traded. Now, the type of accounts that you can open, most people open individual or joint accounts, but you can also open corporate accounts, nonprofits, even trust and retirement accounts, and even accounts for minors. Now, account levels vary based on the amount that you'd like to deposit, but we have a level that is pretty much for everybody, starting at 50,000 and going up to the multi-millions. And the fees vary based on how much that you deposit. Now, the first step in the process is you'll have a video conference with someone here at Wise Money Israel that will give a consultation to you to find out what your best path to opening an account is. The second step is you will fill out forms online in English, so you do not need to speak any Hebrew to do this. You'll sign your agreements and electronically fund your account. And then Wise Money Israel will work with you to determine your investment objectives and put together an investment portfolio that's custom tailored to your needs. And we will continue to manage that portfolio by your guidelines. You'll have online access to the brokerage platform in English. You'll receive monthly and quarterly reports as available in English as well. And we'll have a call with you at least every 6 months, if not more. Customer service is available 6 days a week, and tax reports are provided to you yearly. Now, if this all sounds good to you and it's something that you'd like to get involved in, that's great. You can go to our website. You can sign up for an account right there, or you can request an appointment with us to get to know more. But right now, if you'd like, you can go to the Contact Us page by hovering over Contact and clicking Contact Us. And there you can set up your appointment. So at this time, we're going to go back and we'll answer some questions that you may have for us. But it looks like Ralph wants to know if we invest funds as opposed to individual stocks. Why don't you take that?
Good question. We do invest here and there in what are called exchange-traded funds, but very rarely. And what is the reason for this? There are certain sectors in the Israeli market that we want diversification easily through one instrument, and that will track to that index. And so, for example, the oil and gas exploration space has about 17 different companies in it. We, of course, know this is a very volatile sector. It has a lot of companies that may or may not find commercially viable quantities of oil and gas. Some have already. And so there's an index that follows 10 of the largest companies, and we want to diversify that way. So we basically invest in ETFs that way. But over 90% of our portfolio is in fact invested in individual securities that we choose ourselves, whether it be stocks or bonds, and we had good success in finding those that are actually beating the market here.
Good. We have some frequently asked questions, and we'll go through those real quickly. But first one is about taxation. People want to know if they have to pay tax here if they're not in Israel. Well, the way taxes work is taxes are based in your residence country. So no matter where you are, wherever you file your regular tax return and pay your regular capital gains tax, that's where you'll be paying your taxes. You don't have to file anything in Israel. You don't have to pay any additional taxes in Israel. Everything is done the same way you would do your regular taxes. Deposits also are made electronically. So if you need to make a deposit, you'll be given the instructions to make deposits directly to your brokerage account. You can do it in any currency, although we recommend your home currency because it's a lot cheaper to exchange into shekels at the brokerage than it is from your bank. There's no deposit reception fee. You can do it as often as you like. There's no minimum or maximum amount that needs to be deposited other than what we've set up for your level for your account. Same with withdrawals. You can make withdrawals at any time. There's no fees except depending on the brokerage. Sometimes there can be a withdrawal fee, which is basically a wire fee. You can withdraw in your own currency, and you can do it as often as you like with no minimum or maximum. Similarly, if some people want to know, is there a minimum amount of time I have to do this, or do I have to hold it for some amount of time? There is no minimum or maximum. You can do it as long or as short as you'd like. We don't recommend short periods of time because you won't really see a return over a short period of time because it's hard to time the market to do that. So we do recommend a longer period of time, but there is no penalty or fees for withdrawing early. You can do it for 1 year, 10 years. It doesn't really make a difference. It is no additional fee or penalty for that. So we do have some more questions. Amy asks, is it easy to pull a portion of the investment if so desired? Well, I just answered that. And there's a lot of questions I answered about fees and minimums, but it's really something we need to talk about on a personal one-on-one call because it varies sometimes based on the brokerage and how much you're depositing. So at this time, we're going to invite you to start a live chat with us if you'd like to get more information. We're going to send you a link so that you can go directly to our chat page on our website, and we can continue with you there. So for Evan and myself, we'd like to thank you for spending this time with us, and we wish you a good rest of your weekend and a good week. Thank you very much.